In the meantime, so welcome to each and every one of you, and on behalf of the ISCA, ISCA, we thank our host, the AADC of Sudamericano. Is it well said now?
Perfect.
Claudia? Okay, that's good. So we have had the opportunity to have a few videos up to now, and today we are in the English video of the photo finish, and we have the pleasure and honor of welcoming Janet Nixon. Janet Nixon is, of course, many of you know her. She's a seasoned international photo finish judge, and she is both for World Athletics and World Para-Athletics. She is a wealth of knowledge in terms of photo finish, and I'm sure she will be very helpful to you, mainly for those who have very little exposure to photo finish, to understand a bit about how it operates and also how it operates in the context of the rule. So Janet, the floor is yours. Welcome for, thank you for giving us the opportunity of your time. It's the middle of the night down under. And so thank you for devoting your time for our friends here. The floor is yours, Janet.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. And I'm just getting myself organized to make sure I can let people in. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about photo finish. First, can you just confirm you can see my screen?
Yes, can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. First, I will cover a little bit about how photo finish works. It helps to understand what is going on in the camera and the photo finish room in order to understand how and why we apply the World Athletics rules. So so I'll just I'm Janet Nixon, and I'm an international photo finish judge, and I'm from Australia. Okay, just getting my system going in the right direction. Okay, a few housekeeping points. Please keep yourself on mute, and any questions that you might have, please put them in the chat box. Limit the questions so that we are talking about photo finish. At the end of what I have to say, we will have time for discussion. And you can also send your questions to this email address, which I'm hoping Suren is going to monitor. And the webinar will be recorded and will be available on YouTube. Okay. Photo finish is used to judge places. That is the first job of photo finish. What I'm showing you here is a image from a regular camera, and also an image from the photo finish camera as the athletes have crossed the actual line. The photo finish is used to judge.
Ah, sí, photo finish por los jueces. Sí, aquí estoy. Pero, ¿qué te iba a
Please
decir?
mute your mic, please. You can do that, Janet.
Yep, got it. So the chief photo finish judge, the job is to determine the placing of all the athletes. And as a consequence, as a result of the places, we can also determine their official times. So on this image, you can see that there is a time scale across the bottom, and having made the judgment decision, we can then allocate times. I'm now going to show you a series of slides taken by a video camera that's operating at 30 frames per second. So this is the end of a race and the images are from a video camera, each image is taken, the images are taken 30 times per second. And you can see that from the video camera, we can make some judgments about the athletes, but there are times when it is difficult to decide which athlete got to the finish line first. Okay, an athlete who can run 100 meters in 10 seconds. So the athletes at the elite end, they have traveled 300 millimeters in each frame of a 30 frame video. So if we look at the photo finish line as a photo finish camera does, and we just take one slice of the finish line and push it to one side. And there we go. So we have one there. Then we take another slice and we get a little bit more of what's happening. And then another split second later, we take another slice. And at this point, we've got some of the first athlete. And then we've got a bit of space between athletes. And this next slice actually holds two athletes' torsos in it, in the one slice. So this is what the photo finish camera could do if it was running at a comparable speed to a video. And we would see slices of the finish line. We could then join them all together and we create an image that looks like this with 14 different images produced by the video camera. It's much easier to look at the slices than to look at a video one frame at a time because you can see all of the slices at once. And however, we still have a problem with what happens between those 30th of a second in each of the slices. So if we run it instead of 30 slices per second, but at 1600 frames per second, we would go from this image to this image where we're now taking a slice of the finish line 1600 times per second. And then we would get our final image. Once we have our final photo image, the horizontal axis represents time because we have taken a different slice in time to make up the whole of the image. We can then add cursors in order to determine the placings, remembering that the first job for photo finish is to judge. So we put a line on the slice that represents the torso or the first element of the torso on the finish line, and we can put the judgment places in there. That will then automatically, because we know the timestamp for each slice, that will automatically determine the finish times. And we can add those to the image and we know the times for the athletes. So the first element is the judging and the second element is the timing. Okay, camera alignment. So that's a skim through how the photo finish camera works. Camera alignment is really important. As we take a slice of the finish line, we want to make sure that we are looking at the vertical plane of the leading edge of the finish line. The finish line is white. The finish line usually has black marks between the lanes. So a black mark between lanes 1 and 2, between 2 and 3, between 3 and 4, etc. So when we look through our photo finish camera and we look at the finish line, we want to be looking only at the very thin, the very skinny slice at the start of the finish line, the part of the finish line that is closest to the 100-meter start line. That's where the photo finish camera should be pointing. On the left one here, you can see the line indicated by the green dots. If you have a line that goes across the finish line and not directly along the edge, that will show you an incorrect finish line. The athletes in lane 4, for instance, will have an advantage because they will reach the camera before the athletes in lane 1, who won't reach the camera till after they have got to the back of the finish line. So it's very important that we have a good camera alignment. And this is something that isn't always easy to tell from if you are not actually aligning a camera. If you're aligning a camera, you can see this line normally through a viewfinder within the camera setup. And if you're not aligning the camera itself, and if you're simply the TD, the technical delegate, or the meeting manager, or the competition director, or the silver referee, then it may sometimes be hard to identify what was seen through the camera itself, particularly if the camera is not in a convenient location to have a look for yourself. Here is an example of a photo finish image of athletes crossing the athletics track, but you can see from the background of the photo finish image that we are not looking at the white finish line. We are looking at the different colored lanes either before or after the finish line. So this is an image that indicates the camera was not aligned. It was potentially in front of the actual finish line, in which case the times that would be provided will be shorter than the true times. And we don't want to give times that are shorter. It gives an unfair result, an incorrect result, and it's not a valid result. Okay, here are 2 more examples. We have at the top, we've got an image where it looks generally white-ish. However, you cannot see the black marks in between the lanes, which indicates that we may well be on the back half of the finish line. The finish line is white, and the marks that I talked about between lanes 1 and 2, between 2 and 3, between 3 and 4, they are on the front edge of the finish line for 2 centimeters. And on the back edge, we tend to have no black marks. And so this could potentially be looking at the back half of the finish line, which will give the athletes a longer time. Or it might be right off the front and it's simply a black and white image. The one down the bottom here is clearly an image that is not on the finish line. The lane separators are white and the background of the color of the image that we're looking at, or the track that we're looking at, is red, and that is almost certainly in front of the finish line. And so once again, the athletes and their times will have been shorter than their true times, and so this would not give a valid set of times if this was the image. So although you don't need to look through the camera itself to confirm that it is well aligned, it does help. And sometimes if it is sufficiently badly aligned that it is pointing into the front of the finish line, then you can see that by looking at a photo finish image. The next slide I have shows what we do when we align 2 cameras. So these are 2 images of an alignment check. Sorry, I'm just letting more people in. So here we have 2 cameras on the left-hand side, we have an outfield camera. On the right-hand side, we have an infield camera. Now, these cameras are aligned. You can see clearly we have a white finish line and we have black marks indicating between lanes, between all the lanes, between 1 and 2, between 2 and 3, etc. We also have a double line between 4 and 5, which is quite customary. It helps the photo finish judges orient themselves when they're reading an image to know that this is the point between lanes 4 and 5. But what we're doing in this pair of images is that we took a start signal and provided it simultaneously to both cameras. And then we ran through at 2000 lines per second. So we set the cameras to run at 2000 lines per second. And we had 2 people, one in lane 2 and one in lane 8. And we took a point that is high up on the torso and also a point that was down near the ground. And we did that on both the outfield and on the infield. And that way we can compare the times at the top and the bottom of the vertical plane, which crosses from lanes 2 through to lane 8. And we can make those judgments and read them to a 10,000th of a second, as we've done here we've showing the numbers here. And we can then compare our times on the infield and the outfield, and we can decide whether we are going to now adjust the camera in order to get a better alignment, or we can choose not to adjust the camera, but simply be aware of the infield camera and its position relative to the outfield camera. Often, for instance, an infield will give a shorter time. And if it is difficult to make adjustments, it may be possible that we simply use the infield as a reference point, knowing that it is parallel to the principal camera, or that it's not parallel. And simply by doing this test, we are aware of how imperfect the system is. Ideally, we get them to match up exactly. That doesn't happen very often, that we have a perfect alignment pixel for pixel, but it is something that we strive for. What's important though is to know if the 2 cameras are aligned and how well aligned, and that is almost more important to know than that they are aligned.
Hello?
Seems that Janet is freeze.
Oh, yes,
We
I
wait.
thought that it happened with mine. Zoom.
So let's wait a few seconds. She will come back for sure.
I'm back. Apologies for that. I'm just going to share my screen again. Tell me when you can see my screen again, please, Søren.
Okay, good.
Okay, cool. So I think I dropped out just as I was concluding on this screen, so I'm just going to move on. Unless, Søren, you told me I dropped out 10 minutes ago.
No, it's okay.
Excellent. Okay, next thing is zero test. So the zero test is normally conducted before the start of competition. It is conducted in cooperation with the track referee and the starter. And I find that technical delegates also like to be present or at least conscious of the zero test. The zero test is a check that the photo finish system, as installed, is working correctly. It's a very important test because it picks up big errors in the system and it gives confidence that the times we have are accurate and legitimate. We record times in athletics to 100th of a second, and we will split athletes to 1,000th of a second or even more. And so it's important to know that the times from one heat to another heat, or from one race to another race, from one day to another day, and from one venue to another venue, it's important to know that the times can be compared across the world and across different competitions. And the zero test helps to give confidence for that. So we have, this is one image of a zero test, and here is another image from the ground level of what happens in a zero test. You can see that on the finish line here, we have a board which has a black line on it. The reason we do that is that what we are going to do is we're going to take a photo of the flash of the gun. So when the gun trigger is pulled, it gives a flash. We take a photo of that flash. We compare that to the time when the camera believed it was zero time. And that tells us, and that time must be less than 1 millisecond or 0.001 of a second. And because we're looking at a picture of a flash against a white finish line, we put down a bit of black so that we can compare the white flash against the black background. And we also tend to darken our image so that we have a slightly darker image in order to have a good view of the finish line. Okay, here are some examples. So no, the same example. One example of a zero test. This is on an Omega camera, and we have an electronic gun. The image is a very clean rectangle, and we put the cursor on the very first pixel that is white. So the time that we recorded on this particular instance was negative 0.0003. That is 0.3 milliseconds. So that time is valid for a zero test. It's less than 1 millisecond. It's a negative time, indicating that we saw the image before the camera said it was zero. And that is quite normal and quite acceptable. It doesn't matter whether we have a positive or a negative for the zero test value. The important thing is that the value itself is less than 1 millisecond. So it could be plus 0.0003, or it could be negative 0.0003. Either one is equally valid. They mean slightly different things, but they are both valid. It needs to be less than 1 millisecond from zero. Okay, now I'm going to try and explain the zero test. I'm just picking up the chat. And I'm just going to try and cover questions if I see them. So the zero test is done normally, if we have 2 cameras, it's done once, and it's done an hour or so before the competition. That varies according to the competition you're at. And I find that I do a zero test in conjunction with for a major competition, when there's TV, when there's significant event presentation. I will normally consult the competition director or the event manager in order to find out when is an acceptable time to do the zero test. Because we like to keep a clean track, we try not to do our testing during competition. And so if, for instance, field events have already started, then it may be preferable that we are not down at the finish line with a gun. And so 1 hour before competition is a guide, but it's not always the case. And sometimes we do a zero test that is, more or less than an hour before. Sometimes it's 5 minutes before. The main issue is that if you are going to have a problem with the zero test, you want to have time to be able to correct it. When you're doing a zero test, you can normally do a zero test on both cameras at the one finish line at the one time, assuming that both cameras can have a good view of the same point on the finish line. If you have more than one finish line, as you would in an indoor meet where you have a circular finish line and you also have a straight, like a 60-meter straight, you would do a zero test at each finish line. Okay, so now I have a slide which is an attempt to explain what is happening and what we're really trying to check. I have another slide, which I'll also show you, which is presented slightly differently, but I'm going to go through this one. Just like our photo finish image, the x-axis here is time, and time is moving from the left to the right. So at the beginning of time, our starter pushes the start button. When he pushes the start button, we have light, we have sound, and we have a signal going to the camera. So 3 very different things are happening when the starter pushes the start button. We have a sound emitted, and there's a delay in that sound being heard. It can't happen before the starter pushes the button, it will happen after. There is a light that is shone. Once again, it can't be before, it must be after, but it may be a slightly different point in time from the sound being heard. And we also have a signal that goes to the internal clock for the camera. Once again, that can't happen before the starter pushes the button, but it can happen before the light is received or before the sound is heard. So we have 3 different things happening, and they will happen at 3 different times. And what we're testing is the time between the light being shone and the internal clock being started. And most cameras at an elite level will be operating at 10,000th of a second. The actual timing chip inside the camera will be running at a 10,000th of a second. And we will be taking a picture at normally 2,000 times per second or more in order to identify if the time between the light and the start is less than or equal to 1 millisecond or 1/1000th of a second. So the zero test is trying to decide if there's more or less than 1/1000th of a second between the light and the internal clock starting. I'm now going to show you another one, which is essentially the same information, but with a slightly different presentation. So once again, the starter pushes the start button. We have light, we have sound, and we have, after, this is for an analog gun. So for an analog gun, which is not an electronic gun, but a regular loud gun that the starter may use with ammunition or a cap, the internal clock cannot start till after the sound has been made, and we have a transducer which converts that sound and sends a signal to the camera. And so for an analog clock, we cannot possibly have a time which is before the sound. And normally with most ammunition, we have light and sound are approximately at the same time. And so generally we will see the light before we get the internal clock. And so we will often have a negative time for an analog gun zero test. Down here, we indicate that although the clock behind the camera is running at 10,000 times per second, 10,000 clicks per second, we may only be capturing 2,000 lines per second. And that capturing is picking up a number of clicks of the clock, of the camera clock. And therefore, each of those pixels are represented down here with the different pixels showing the times that would be shown at that point in time. Okay. I think that covers the theory behind a zero test. Happy to talk about it more if we have time. I wanted to show you a zero test, having shown you a good zero test. In fact, I'm just going to go back to that. So I'm going back to this one that I showed you earlier. Where I have the red cursor is at the very beginning of time for the zero test. You can see on this image that for this particular gun, for this particular setup, we have a time scale down the bottom, and from 0 to 0.1 is what is represented by the flash. If we were to read the image at the wrong end, we would have a time of 0.1. So we read it at the beginning and we had a time of 0.0003. If we had read it at the other end of the flash, our time would have been 0.1. That's 0.1 second, because that's how long the flash is available for. If you have a reading that is 0.1, that tends to mean that could mean one of two big things, one of three big things, that you read the wrong end and there's nothing wrong with the equipment, or that the software is set up incorrectly and it is not registering the time till the end of the change. When the starter pulls the trigger, there's normally an opening of the circuit and a closing of the circuit, or it could be a close and then an open, depending on the system. And there's a software setting normally to allow you to choose that. So if you're getting a reading of 0.1, it could be because you read the wrong end. It could be because your software is not set up in the photo finish room to the same settings as we would have on the ground with the start system.
Janet,
So,
sorry, I think there are some people trying to enter.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I don't see them. Am I the host?
Yes, you are the host.
Okay, so I should see them. Give me a moment. Are you sure, Claudia?
The host, sorry, Roberto, are you here, Beto? You are the host. Roberto, are you here? Sorry, Janet, I will try to call him. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I think I am not the host. Yeah. Okay, I will continue. Okay, so yeah, I think it's important as you prepare to be a silver referee to understand what is a legitimate zero test and what is not. And so those are two things that could be shown up in the zero test. It could be that you're reading it incorrectly. It could be that the software is set up incorrectly. It could be that there is a problem with the equipment. I have done zero tests all around the world and had all sorts of different reasons for an incorrect zero test. It's very important to understand the difference between 0.3 of a millisecond and 0.1 of a second. And that is important in understanding zero tests. You may not need to know what is wrong. You need to be able to know that it is wrong. Okay, I'm just going to jump forward again and show you this one, which is a zero test on a Finish Links camera. And we have here, so this is a different style of gun, but we have a cursor on one edge of the zero test and a cursor on the other edge. In this instance, the one on the left is negative 4 milliseconds, so 0.004, that's 4 milliseconds. And the one on the right is showing a value of 0.0. This zero test is not acceptable. Even though we can put a cursor on the flash of the gun and we can have a value of 0, the light was actually seen at 4 milliseconds, so 0.004. And the first point, the 4 milliseconds is a negative. So the first point of the zero test is at this end, and the last point is at this end. There is something wrong with this setup because we are seeing the flash a long time before we get the zero signal. So this zero test would not be acceptable. If somebody showed you this and just had the cursor and it said 0, you still need to understand which end is the beginning and which end is the end. And in order to do that, it does help to know if you're looking at an infield or an outfield. Okay, that is enough on zero tests. Okay, I'm going to now move on to the torso. So when we judge the finish, the torso is defined as the body, not the head, not the neck, not the arms, legs, hands, or feet. In the document, which is available on the World Athletics site, we have a photo finish guidelines, and these images are taken from that document. But I'm just going to talk through them a little bit now. We have the medical version of the torso, where it is the end of the clavicle is the start of the torso. So this red line here indicates the start of the torso as we see it on our own shoulders. The point of the shoulder is not part of the torso. When we are judging photo finish images, we don't normally have a stationary athlete standing with their shirt off in order to identify their clavicle. And so we need to make a judgment call. This image here shows in red the torso definition. So we've colored in red the definition of the torso, which if you do not have a good view of it front on, which is quite normal, we normally say we take the point of the shoulder and the base of the neck, which are often easily identifiable on a photo finish image, and we go in 1/3, and that is the start of the torso across this part of the body. Then most of the torso is fairly clear. We come in under the arm and down the side, and the other part of the torso that is often open for discussion is we use the widest part of the hip to include in the torso. So not down the leg, but the widest part of the hip is what's defined as the torso. And this is another cartoon diagram of what the torso is, how the torso is represented. So you can see the point of the shoulder is not the torso. Okay, This is an image that I often like to use to explain to people about PHOTOFINISH and to teach people about the judgments. I like to ask people to look at these 3 images and consider which one is a correct judgment for a PHOTOFINISH image. The answer is that all 3 of them are in fact correct. They are athletes crossing the finish line in different formats, in different ways, and all 3 of them are correct interpretations of the torso. So on the first one, we have it cutting through the torso 1/3 in and just under the armpit. On this one, we have probably a male hurdler would finish like this quite often. It's not unusual for the back to be the first part of the torso that crosses the line. And here we have a female and all of the torso counts, including the breast. So these are 3 different torsos crossing a finish line and all of the judgments are correct. I've now got a couple of real life photos. I said at the start, this is, we're in March, which is the end of the outdoor season in Australia. We have our national competition in about 3 weeks, and we are having championships at a variety of levels. This photo was taken not that long ago, and it was a championship competition, and it was the women's 100 meters. I was not present, but got a hold of the photos. This, I'm showing you first, second, and third. This is the outfield view, and it would appear quite clear that this athlete has a clean torso. We cannot really see the other athlete properly, but we could guess where she is. Fortunately, we had an infield camera and we didn't need to guess. The infield camera from the other view quite clearly shows the inner athlete and where her torso is, but we cannot see the outer athlete. And we could guess where she is, but we can't see it correctly. So in this instance, I think that if all you had was this image, it would be not unreasonable to make a guess that the athlete in front is ahead of the athlete behind. Behind in terms of the camera view. I'm going to go back to the first one again. And here, people may have given the athlete on the outside the win over the athlete on the inside. But indeed, when we look at the infield, we see that that is not justified. As it was, they did an alignment against the knee and put a cursor down on each camera and compared it to a point that they could see on both images. So the knees of both athletes and also the hands of both athletes, they were able to confirm the alignment of the 2 cameras. And in the end, they split it by a pixel, I believe, or it might have been 2 pixels, 1/1000th of a second. But it was a very close decision, and it was based on using other reference points and the 2 images. So there's the infield image again, and you can see that on both images you have a clean shot of the knees and fingers, and you can see that you can use those as reference points to confirm your alignment, both up high at the torso point and also down low at the foot point. So that was a close race. And had we not had an infield camera, it would have been fair to give a dead heat because we could not see the other athlete's torso clearly. And if you can't see, it is perfectly all right to give a dead heat. You do not need to make a guess. Here are some images which we had on Saturday. So 2 days ago. These are images that I just pulled along to show you. On this one, we have, for the women's race, the leading athlete was a clear torso. The second place, we did have the benefit of an infield camera, but you can see the cursor goes through 1/3 into the shoulder across the top. Third place is once again clear from this side, and fourth place in this image, we had the benefit of the infield camera in order to see exactly where the torso was behind that arm. Had we not had the infield, I would have put it further into the body. You can see torso down here under the arm, but you can't directly see the torso further up, and I would have had to pull it back and only give benefit to the athlete of what I could actually see. Okay, so that is it in terms of looking at some images and how to read a torso. There are many more complicated ones that you can have, but generally, if you have a good clean image, you should be able to put the cursor on the pixel of where the athlete is if they're running fast and you have your camera set up so that it's an appropriate speed. This men's one, I remember I put this in because I could just see a little bit of the torso showing up above the arm there, and I was able to put it on the cursor on the torso at this point here and giving the benefit of that. Okay. I am still not the host. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So next is ties, and I'm still got time. I'm going to tell you a story about ties. For this, if it's a tie within one race, it's a tie within the race. We do not have to split them, and it might be a tie because we can't see, as in the earlier examples had we not had an infield camera, or it could be a tie because indeed we can see perfectly and two people's torsos crossed at the same pixel. However, if there's a tie for a ranking position that progresses from different heats, the chief photo finish judge considers the times. To make that clearer, I have a story. This story is taken from the World Championships in Beijing 2015. And I use this because you can, if you choose, go to the Olympics websites, pull down the images and study this for yourselves and understand what was happening. So in the men's 100, we had 3 semis. First of all, if you have 3 semis going to a single final, the progression will be the first 2 qualifying by place and the next 2 qualifying by time. So in this case, the top 2 in semi 1 were Bolt and Degrassi. They ran 9.96 and 9.96 on this image, and it's also worth going to the website and pulling down the image because it gives you a timescale down the bottom, and you can have a look to see where the cursors are and where the times are, and that will help you to understand reading times on a photo finish image. We always round up and give the athlete a slower time than they might have otherwise. We never give them a faster time. Just as on the field, we never give a longer distance. We always give a shorter distance if we have to round. In the timing, we always give a slower time. So the first 2 athletes ran 9.96. The next 2 athletes both ran 9.99, but you can see they are clearly separated. So there's no doubt that Brommel was 3rd and Sue was 4th. They are very, very well separated, but to 100th of a second, they were the same time. So we then went to semi-final 2, and the winner was 9.77 and 9.86 was second. They go through as place qualifiers, and third place was 10.00. Well, given that in semi-final 1, we had 2 athletes on 9.99, this third place athlete has already been eliminated from progressing to the final. So the first 2 qualify on places, and nobody else from this heat will qualify because we already have 2 faster time qualifiers from semi-final 1. Then we await semi-final 3. And in semi-final 3, we had a winning time of 996, same as semi-final 1. Second place was 997, and those two go through on places, and third place is 999. So to 100th of a second, our third place is equal to the third places from semi-final 1. So to summarize, we had our first place athletes were automatically in by place, regardless of their times. The second place athletes were automatically in based on their places, regardless of their times. And the third, the timed qualifiers, and we were planning for a final of 8. There was a tie for the 7th position based on times to 100th of a second. We had 3 athletes on the 7th position. And so therefore we had to go back to the chief photo finish judge and determine the times to 1,000th of a second. 2.001 of a second. Just as a refresher, semi-final 1 had first and second were 996 and third and fourth were both 999. Well, clearly, even without going to 1,000th of a second, you can see that third place was clearly ahead of fourth place. And so really, Brommel, who was third, was going to be the fastest qualifier out of these 2. And then it was a case of deciding where did the other third place fit in amongst them. As it turned out, third place from semi-final 3 was the same time as fourth place from semi-final 1. So Brommel got in as the faster of the qualifiers, and these 2 were equal, and we had a spare lane, and so all 3 of them progressed to the final, and we had these 3 athletes had all run a 9.99 in the semi-final, and they were all progressed. Brommel was the faster of them. These 2 were the same time to 1,000th of a second, and they both got progressed because we had the spare lane. There could have been a coin toss. So it's important to understand the breaking of the tie rule and where who has responsibility in that. And this is a beautiful example of it, and you can go study it yourselves in your own time if you so choose. Okay, so that's enough on ties. I am going to talk about wind, which is not always covered well. So the wind readings for 100 meters is the wind is recorded for 10 seconds. And for a hurdles race, be it 100 or 110, it's recorded for 13 seconds. For a 200 meter race, the wind velocity should be measured for a period of 10 seconds from the time when the first athlete enters the straight. So in this photo, we have the athletes coming around the bend from a 200 meters. You can see the dotted line of the straight and the solid line of the bend, and the wind reading, I haven't quite got it right. It would be another step on for this athlete. This is the leading athlete as they enter the straight. And as he enters the straight, so when the dotted line merges with the solid line, that is the start of the straight. It's not back at the 100 meter point. It's where the bend comes through. That is when we start the wind reading for the 200 meters. I know that there are some systems around where you have the opportunity to set the wind reading to begin 10 seconds after the 200 meters starts. That is incorrect. You can set it to start 13 seconds, 15 seconds, whatever it is after the start of the race. That is incorrect. The correct way to do a wind reading for a 200 meters is to start the wind when the athlete enters, when the leading athlete enters the straight. Okay, so that was a point that I wanted to make. And that's something to be aware of. As a silver referee, you need to understand where to measure the wind reading. When we have a wind gauge, although it is often operated by PHOTOFINISH, not always, but often operated by PHOTOFINISH, the setup of the wind gauge is still the responsibility of the track referee to make sure that the wind gauge is placed correctly, less than 2 meters from lane 1 and 50 meters from the finish. And also pointing in the direction towards the finish so that we have a positive wind reading when the athletes are assisted by the wind and a negative wind reading when the athletes are hindered by the wind. So it's still the track referee's responsibility to confirm the wind gauge is set up correctly. However, it's often the work of the PHOTOFINISH team to actually operate it and to test it electronically. Okay. I have one final slide. And on this, I'm just going to run through some points to think about in terms of being a silver referee and considering a PHOTOFINISH system. It is, if you have a good PHOTOFINISH team, you don't need to set it up yourself. You don't need to operate. You don't need to be a PHOTOFINISH judge. You do need to understand as a silver referee, you do need to understand when electronic timing is not valid. When can you not use the electronic timing? So I tried to list a few times when the electronic timing is not valid. And I've certainly had times in my life as a PHOTOFINISH chief when I have said no, that the results of what we're producing are not valid and we cannot use them. We can provide judgment, but we cannot provide times. I have also locked out of my room qualified ITOs while I worked out what the problem was when we had an issue, and I've said, no, the times are not valid, we cannot use them. If the camera did not receive a valid start signal for whatever reason, if we used a push of a button in order to start the race because we were concerned that the start signal might not be correct, if the system was not armed, if there are some times when, for instance, you might get a start signal, then there's a false start, and then nobody reset the system and we didn't receive the true signal, you cannot use another start signal. So if we don't have a valid start signal that corresponds to the actual start of the race, then the times are not valid. If we don't have an image of the finish, then we do not have an electronic time. So we cannot just use beam breaks or timing gates or other forms. If we don't have an image of the finish, then we do not have an electronic time. We do not have an electronic time if we are using hand times. If somebody is sitting in the grandstand with a stopwatch and the stopwatch gives times to 2 decimal places, that is not an electronic time. Even if the operator of the stopwatch is very, very good and often comes very close to electronic timing, that is still not an electronic time and it cannot be used as an electronic time. So if we don't have a start signal or if we don't have an image of the finish, it's not an electronic time. If the camera had a failure during the race, so in, for instance, a 5,000 meters, it could be that the camera had a problem and we lost the camera, so to speak. We restarted it. We reinitiated a start signal, either by typing in a time or otherwise. If it wasn't operational, then you would have grave doubts about how it could be used for an electronic time. If there's any doubt about the accuracy of the equipment, if the zero test, for instance, failed, or if you have some other reason to doubt that the equipment is operating correctly, if you have 2 cameras and they are drifting in their start signals. If they are synchronized and then they are not synchronized, you can have some doubt about the accuracy of the equipment, in which case do not use it for electronic timing. You may still use it for judging and say, yes, I have a camera on the finish line and I can tell you this athlete beat that athlete, but you cannot use it for electronic timing if you have some doubt about the accuracy. If the camera is not viewing the finish line, so the examples I showed earlier of photo finish images which were clearly off the finish line, then you cannot use it for electronic timing. And yeah, if the time was recorded on a handheld device or a transponder, or if the system was out of calibration. The system could be out of calibration at any point, but it is a requirement that our systems are calibrated at least every 4 years. So if you do not have a certificate of calibration that is less than 4 years old, then your system is out of calibration and you cannot use it for a valid electronic time. Those are not negotiable. They're disappointing and they're sad and they may make everybody feel bad, but these elements of when you cannot use electronic timing cannot be discussed. That's the way it is. You can still use your equipment to give people some idea of what they ran and also judgment, but you cannot use them for electronic timing. Okay, that is the end of what I was going to talk about. And I can now answer questions. Suren, do you want me to just go through the chat and cover what I haven't already covered?
Yes, go ahead, Janet.
Okay, so I think I was keeping an eye on it and I think I have covered some of it. Yeah, okay, okay, the question on the 2 cameras, do you have to do it on both or just the main camera? That's actually a good question. If you're going to use another camera ever, if it's considered a backup in any way, then you want to have a 0 test on it. So basically, yeah, if your other camera is ever going to be used, in other words, if it is a backup and if you have a failure on your principal, you want to have a 0 test on your backup or your infield, whichever you choose. There are also times when you may have some reason not to use the official camera, like if somebody waved a flag right in front of it and your alternate camera becomes your official camera, then you want to have had a 0 test on it. You cannot just have a 0 test on the principal and then use a different camera for timing and judgment. Okay, the next question is, when do we do the 0 test? At the start of each session. I have been known to do a 0 test after the session. For instance, at competitions where we simply have not had the opportunity prior to the start of competition and we've been under pressure to start, we may do a 0 test during competition or at the end of competition. And that is acceptable because the idea is that you want to know at the end of the day that the system was working. If you have not made any changes, you can confirm it afterwards, but normally at the start of each session. Certainly at World Championships and Olympics, we do it at the start of each session. If the session runs right through and there's not really a separate session, then one at the start of the day is perfectly adequate because it's one session. So you may choose to define session differently. I tend to say if we walked out of the room and took a break, that's a clean session. Is a 0 test done on both cameras? Yes. Okay, the next question I'm not sure. Is the 1/100th on the 0 test standard for all competitions? I think you mean 1,000th on the 0 test. Is it standard for all competitions? In which case, yes. The answer is that a 0 test confirms that the gun is starting less than 1/1000th of a second before or after the light flash. And that is consistent across all competitions, regardless of the level, whether it's at your local competition or whether it's the World Championships. How often should the photo finish camera be recalibrated? At least every 4 years, if not more frequently. If you have any reason to doubt it, recalibrate. One thing we do in Australia, we're a big country, and to go from one city to another is a 1.5 hour flight. When we have a competition and we bring a camera in from our national body, we will always, if we can, operate as many cameras as we can, just as a form of calibration to check that all our systems are operating approximately together. And we have used that to identify faulty cameras. When we're at a venue, they only have one camera, that's all they've ever used, they never compare it to anything else, they don't know that there's a problem. And so we use that as a form of just having a level of comfort that, yes, our cameras are all working properly, because we're comparing them to other cameras that are used in other venues. And it's unlikely that they would all fault in the same direction simultaneously. But there's nothing better than getting your system calibrated, and you must get it done every 4 years. Okay. If anybody wants my email address, you can talk to Soren or contact me directly if you don't already have it. But yeah, contact Soren, and I'm happy for my NetSpace email address to go out to anyone, Soren. Okay, should the beginning of the straight be marked with cones to assist manual wind gauge operators? I don't believe so. I believe the dotted line is perfectly adequate, and that is as easy as you need it to be. But there's nothing wrong with it. I know I've certainly used at some top class meets when I've been working with the timing contractors, there is often a set of flowers or a plant or some other indicator at the start of the straight, and I will tell them that is their indicator. If there's any doubt, I explain that's where I want them to push the button, or when the athletes get to that point. So you can use cones, or you can use a bunch of flowers or a pot plant to mark that point if you find that easier. What's my opinion on photo finish apps on cell phones? I think that photo finish apps on cell phones are a lovely gimmick, and they do not provide electronic timing in any form, but they can be very useful and very cheap for training. That's what I think. Automatic wind gauges. So not quite sure there, Michelle, what you're looking for. So automatic wind gauge in terms of automatic operation. For many systems, we can automatically start the wind gauge when the gun goes for 100 meters or for 110 meters. It still needs to be set for whether it's a 10-second or a 13-second reading. They are like, that's quite common. It happens a lot. It's perfectly all right. As I said, with the 200 meters, I do not consider an automatic start on the wind gauge is acceptable. It's not in accordance with the rules. Somebody needs to push a button when the athlete enters a straight for a 200 meters. But for 100 meters, that can be automatic based on the software. Okay, teams or managers view the photo finish images for protest purposes. So the question here is, can the teams or managers view the photo finish images for protest purposes? And what's the process? The first question, the answer is yes. Anybody can see the photo finish images. I know that in my hometown in Sydney, we tend to push them to the web as soon as we can. And when people ask to see the image, we tell them to go to the website. That satisfies many of the questions, and people are happy with that. We also are very open and very transparent and happy to show people the photo finish images for protest purposes or for any other purpose. It is acceptable at a high level. So talking World Championships, Olympic Games at this point, and your area association may well adopt similar practices. The process is normally that teams or athletes managers go through the TIC, the Technical Information Centre. They can come to the photo finish room. Often accreditation will limit the access, and that is lovely because it means that we get on with our job and we don't get interrupted. If a TIC official accompanies the team manager, then they will normally contact by radio and let us know that they're coming and what they want to look at. And we can, in that manner, we can prepare the image to show as clearly as we can the image or images that we use to make our decision. And we can explain the logic behind the decision. It is perfectly normal for people to want to have a look for a protest before they go through to protest to the, to appeal to the jury. Or to protest to the referee. It's generally considered that if the protest is about the photo finish decision, that the chief photo finish judge is effectively a referee and can make that decision and dismiss the protest or accept the protest as deemed appropriate. And the time is recorded appropriately based on the photo finish judge. That has generally been the practice in recent years. So although the photo finish judge is not a referee per se, if there's a decision, if there's a protest on the photo finish judgment, then they are effectively acting in that manner in terms of protests. And then the team or the team manager can choose to appeal to the jury just as they would for any other referee decision. In my experience, I have not had, I think I've had 4 jury decisions on photo finish judgments, and 2 of them were last year in back-to-back global competitions. Normally when somebody challenges an image at a lower level, it's because we've misidentified an athlete rather than we've misread it. At the global level, I don't think I've ever had a judgment overturned by a jury, but it's certainly open and it could happen and it's on the cards, and the jury are totally within their rights to overturn a decision, just as they can overturn any decision of any referee if they have cause to. So hopefully I've explained that bit about the protest and how that fits in with photo finish. I'm not going into all the other ways that you can protest and track and throws and jumps. Okay, repeat the reasons for the double lines for the 4 and 5 and who inputs these lines. Okay, so when we have a photo finish, image, we see mostly, and I'm still sharing. Sorry, since I'm still sharing, I'm going to flip back to my alignment. Okay, so you can see on these 2 images, and I'll just look at this one for the moment. I presume you can see my mouse. We have a black line. Remember the x-axis, so the horizontal axis is time, and on the finish line we have a white finish line, and we have a black mark between lanes 1 and 2, between 2 and 3, between 3 and 4, and between 4 and 5, we have 2 black marks. The reason we do that is that when the athlete crosses the line, if their foot is on the ground, we can see clearly that they were in 4 or 3. They were above the double line or they were below the double line. It helps us to identify the athletes. If the athletes are not wearing hip numbers, we need to be sure of which lane they're in. And to be fair, in my competitions in Australia, our athletes do not wear hip numbers for sprint events. I know they do for higher level competitions, but for lower level competitions, we want to be able to identify the athletes. Let me flick through to one of these. Yeah, I've blown them up a bit too much. But you can see on this image, the athletes are in the air and it's a little challenging to determine what lanes they're in. And the double line simply helps us to orient ourselves based around the actual track. Where is it? I got some other ones here. Yeah, so here we have this athlete here is just above the double line. She's actually in this lane here, which is lane 5. And I know that that's 5 because I have my double line here. And if she was there, she would be in 4. So this girl here is 5. This one here is in this lane, which is 6. She's in 7, she's in 8, and I can tell that because I know that is 4 and 5. I don't have lane indicators down the side, but I have my double line, and I know the double line is between 4 and 5. So I hope I've answered that one. And I have 2 more questions. The next one is concerning the 0 test done with a gun. When do we start counting the pixels according to the image ratio of the camera? Okay, let me go back to the 0 test. So yeah, okay, when it's done with and I think this one's probably electronic too. So if it's done with a real gun, an analog gun, the explosion that happens is often not perfect white light. So when we have an electronic gun, our light is artificial and it's white. It's across the spectrum of the colors. If it's an analog gun, the flash is often full of color. We still should take the very first point in time of the flash. So the flash could be white, as it is in this instance, or it could be red, green, or blue. In that instance, if you have a red, green, and blue showing on the image, and this is based on my understanding of the cameras and the way they work internally, I use the green, which is the closest one to the timing pixel. So the first green pixel, if there's any doubt, but otherwise it's the first pixel itself. So it's the first pixel that you should be using. If it's white, it's the first pixel. So it's this one here. And I also, when I am not operating the camera directly myself, if I have an operator who is operating it for me, I always ask them to put the cursor in the middle of the pixel so that I can clearly see which pixel it's on. This one, I put the pixel on, and the way it shows, having locked it in, which I did in order to show you the times here, and then I took a screenshot. I like to actually place the cursor in the middle of the pixel so that it's clear to both the operator and the chief, regardless of what role I'm taking, which pixel we're looking at. If you put it on the edge between 2 pixels, you can't be sure whether you meant the one on the left or the one on the right. So I always put it in the middle when we're making the judgment, but the software will then pull it back to the edge of the pixel. I hope that answered that one. Okay, Eleanor, Okay, so Eleanor, you're asking me, do we need a photo finish referee and a photo finish chief judge and a track referee? No, I don't think we do. I think that we need a competent chief photo finish judge, and that person can make the decisions about the judgment. That person is normally perfectly suited to the role, and there's no, I don't believe there's a requirement for a separate referee. I know we do that in the call room and start area where we have a competent person, and then we also have a referee, but I don't think it's warranted in photo finish. I also don't think it's practical. So no, I wouldn't suggest that. Okay, another one. Would you recommend a tie break for 8th place where there is a lane 9 spare lane in a final? Personally, I would always push for it. Having the extra athlete go through. I have seen enough photo finish images to know that it is not a black box. We don't know everything. The images I've shown you from the weekend were fairly nice, clean images. We often have images that are not nearly so clean. I would always give the athlete the benefit. If we have a spare lane, I'd put them through. That's my personal preference. And I think it's in the spirit of the competition. But I also know that we don't always have a spare lane, and the rule is very clear. It is a, we go to a time to 1,000th of a second, and that's a decision based off the chief photo finish judge. I'm not sure if I mentioned it though, if there's a questionable decision on where the cursor could have been placed, and if there's some doubt about where to place the cursor, I always like to go back to the chief photo finish judge to make that call on the 1,000th of a second. The photo finish judges only need to time to 100th of a second. They need to go to 1,000th to split ties, and they may have made a decision based on the 100th of a second and not based on 1,000th. So even though the administration or the result system can pull through the times to a higher level of precision, that doesn't mean that the judge has made a decision at the higher level. So when we are splitting places for whatever reason, I would always go back to the photo finish judge to make that decision. Okay. Eleanor, if they don't agree, if the photo finish chief judge and the track referee don't agree, well, the track referee gets to say when the judges don't agree. But if there is a single chief photo finish judge, then the single chief photo finish judge makes a decision on the times and places. That's their job. That's what they're there for. Okay. I think I've run out of chat messages. Unless, Søren, I've missed something, please tell me. So, yeah.
No, you're good. You're good, Janet. It's okay.
Jane, I have one question that you didn't answer, please.
Sorry, yes?
Yeah, due to the sensitivity of electronic equipment, why does the span only 4 yearly?
Sorry, why is it 4 yearly?
Why is it every 4 years, a calibration process instead of due to electronic equipment sensitivity? Why is it not done on a yearly basis instead of 4 years? It's just a decision by World Athletics or the photo finish companies?
Okay, I've never been asked the why question before. I try to accept the rules as they're written down. But having been asked the why question, I would suggest that it is really expensive. We have, I know, yeah, it's expensive. And you're from a wealthy country, it might not be a big deal. I would not want to be forcing the calibration more frequently than that. But if there's a good scientific reason to have it done more frequently, and you don't have any evidence, if there's evidence that there's a problem, it absolutely should go back and get calibrated. If I can talk to the two major suppliers of Finish Links and Amiga, Finish Links, they simply put a new chip in, but it still has to go back to a service company to have that happen. And if it's Amiga, it tends to go back to Switzerland. From Australia, that knocks us out for 3 weeks and we have no camera and it's expensive. So I don't want to be doing it more than every 4 years.
Understood, accepted.
Yeah, so I mean, good question, valid question. Calibration cost, I don't personally pay for it, but I know that nobody wants to. So I don't know what it is. I expect it's in Australian terms, it would be maybe $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, something of that order to make that happen. And we certainly don't want to be doing that with every single camera. Yeah, so we do validate our cameras approximately by simply running them at the same time, and we're comfortable and we know when there's a camera that's faulty and we don't use it and we get it fixed. There you go. Have I convinced you?
Yes, very much.
Okay, no worries. Anything else, either in the chat or verbally? Hey, Søren, I think I've timed this nicely. Just saying.
Oh, yes, you're perfect.
Yes, a question about sector tape on grass surfaces for the finish line. And if photo finish could be used to measure 1,000 meter splits in long distance races.
Okay, so the first question, I think you said, can we do it on grass? Was that the question for the?
Yeah, could you use sector tape, the tape that you use for the sectors in the throwing events? If you could use that tape to make a finish line on grass.
You could certainly try. I know that, yes, I have used PHOTOFINISH on a grass track. I would certainly not, I have not seen a grass track used to a level of confidence in the measurement of the track and the alignment of the camera that I would warrant as worthy of world rankings. I would be very dubious about it if it was on a grass track, just because the finish line is going to move with the grass. You could try it, and it would be very helpful to the athletes to know how fast they're running, but I wouldn't use it as legitimate. I can't see that you could get it to be consistent enough. But maybe you're really good at it and your grass is absolutely perfect. Ours blows in the wind. So the other part of your question was the 1,000 meter time. So, okay, so there's a requirement to provide times after 1,000 meters for the leading athlete in races of 3,000 meters or longer. That can be done at the finish line using beams, and also at the 200 meter point using beams. Also for a steeplechase, we also provide 1,000 meter times, and that can be done also using beams, although I believe it is acceptable to use those times. Sorry, I'll stop sharing my screen. We can also use those times by simply providing effectively a hand time for those. So somebody pushes a button when the athlete crosses the 1,000 meter point. That's how I've seen it happen at a range of levels of competition. You can use beams, you can use a hand, effectively a hand time. Somebody pushes a button when the athlete crosses to give the 1,000 meter times. Okay.
I think that covers everything. On behalf of ISCA, Janet, that was a fantastic presentation. I knew I wanted my friends to share that. You have really gone to the point and really defined what is the essential of PHOTOFINISH and how it works. And this is really priceless. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Janet. And I'm sure my friends will be more than happy of your presentation.
You're welcome. It was fun.
And thanks again for getting out of bed and coming to share your vast experience with us.
You're welcome.
Okay. Claudia, do you have anything before we conclude?
I just see that Olive.
Hello. Hi, my name is Olive McNaughton from Jamaica. I am sorry, but I just joined late. I have not received any email regarding this training. Somebody from one of my colleagues just sent me the information. I missed everything. Question, can I get the recordings, or can I get the recordings of the previous ones that were sent? So that I just sent an email that I'm interested in participating.
Okay, this is, you know, the ISCA, we decided after the results of the last evaluation, we decided that we were here we wanted to help our friends for the reevaluation. So it's a personal initiative by the friends of ISCA, and we are all those who are all silver and gold whom we have contacted, referees have willingly come forward to share this. So it's not something that it's official convene. It's open to everybody to assist, and the numbers are simply growing after each presentation. But all the presentations will be posted on the YouTube channel. We will give you the address as we go along. So don't worry if you have missed a presentation. It will be available on YouTube, and we'll try to work on the Facebook also. It will be available there, so it will be you can get access to that.
Okay, thanks much. But hopefully I can get an email advising of the thing. I don't know if my email is correct, but I just sent an email to the email that was shared with me. Thank you.
Okay. So Claudia?
Thank you again to Roberto in name of ADC, Atletismo Sudamericano, and Suran, and of course Janet. And if somebody's here and didn't follow the registration to Visions, the links on chat, if it's possible to follow this registration. And see you tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. This month we will have many visions. Okay.
Just to remind you that it's going on in 3 languages: English, French, and Spanish. And it's basically the same backbone presentation, which will be presented by different presenters in the 3 languages. So yeah, you can assist to all. I mean, if you understand English, French, and Spanish, it's open to everybody. Those who know, you can transmit to your friends. It's open. There's no restriction. Anyone can participate. But the aim was to help our friends going for the reevaluation in April to get additional baggage, additional experience from those who already have experience in that. So thanks again, Janet. Thanks, Claudia and ADC Atletismo Americano for hosting us. And we see you all tomorrow. Tomorrow, it will be the turn of Alison for the French version of the PHOTOFINISH.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you very much. Janet, Roberto.